Hi, I'm Ginevra Liptan. I'm a physician with fibromyalgia. I specialize in fibromyalgia and am now working in the field of addiction. I'm delighted today to be hosting a panel with three amazing women who are going to share with us their stories of post-traumatic growth. I hope it will be educational and inspirational for everybody watching. I personally experienced early childhood abandonment, trauma, and sexual assault when I was 12 years old. And that really manifested in my life as depression, starting in my teenage years and then moving into chronic pain. And I think that trauma was a huge trigger for my development of fibromyalgia. As part of my healing of fibromyalgia and looking into what was going on in my body, I realized how important it was to start to look at the wounding from that early childhood and adolescent trauma and heal it. And I think that healing of the wounds of trauma is really what we mean when we say post-traumatic growth. For me, when I think about trauma, and I've thought about it a lot in the days before this panel, I think about trauma as not only a physical or emotional injury, but it's really a wound to the soul. And it can feel like a shattering, a loss, an explosion, an implosion. And often it's a loss of self or a loss of innocence or a loss of a sense of safety. I think that that wounding can then result in a lot of insidious negative self-talk and self-beliefs that we're not even maybe aware of. Certainly that was in my case. And finding a way to look into the wounding that trauma has caused really is the first piece, the first step in trying to heal that trauma. I think that finding hope, reclaiming our broken or lost parts, and finding ways to rewrite and reclaim our narrative is so fundamental in healing trauma. So with me today, I have three wonderful women who are going to share their stories of post-traumatic growth. Heather Grace, Maria Socolof, and Kathleen Sutherland. I'm hoping that you can share your story and we can answer some questions and just talk about our own journeys in a way that can be helpful for people watching this panel. Who would like to go first? How about Maria? I'm going to call on you first. Would you like to share your story with the panel?
Sure, I would love to. Thank you. I'll just give a brief background, and then I know with the questions later we'll cover a lot more. But my story is that I did have actually a very lovely and wonderful childhood, as far as I remembered. I was a competitive gymnast. I did well in school. I went on to get my graduate degree. Got married, had two kids. Everything was going great until I was 40 when I ruptured a disc in my neck by rolling over in my sleep. And that started my pain journey, which turned into my healing journey. And that was in 2005. And I was doing everything the doctors were recommending and trying everything I could to try to get rid of this debilitating, excruciating pain that I had. It lasted for 2 years with nothing significantly helping until I finally started to do some body work. It was myofascial release therapy, the John Barnes method. And I went away, after doing it for a few months, I went away for a 2-week intensive where it was an outpatient situation, but I was going 3 sessions a day for 2 weeks. And it was through that process that I started to understand the connection between trauma and emotions and my physical pain. And that's when the healing started. And it was at the end of that 2-week session that I woke up from a dream the morning of the last day. And I remembered that my brother had molested me when I was 10 years old. And I had had no recollection of that until that moment. And it was crystal clear when I did remember. And for what it's worth, he corroborated it. So I know it's true. I didn't want it to be true. Half of me, was wondering if I was just crazy, but I knew in my gut, in my soul, that it was true. So that's when I realized I had a huge journey to go on. And that last day of my intensive physical therapy, that's when my pain significantly came down. And then during that treatment too, I realized there were other, I'm calling more minor traumas than the molestation by my brother. I was stuck in an undertow. Just the next surgery that I did have after I ruptured the disc when I was 40, that was traumatic. And I think some of it was related to even that being stuck in an undertow when I thought I was going to die when I was about 5 years old. having my neck cut because it was neck surgery. That was all related. And then just the trauma of being in pain for 2 years. So they were all building on each other. But the true trauma that I know that has been the hardest to deal with is the sibling sexual abuse.
Excellent. Thank you. I also had amazing healing with John Barnes myofascial release, but I think any lots of types of body work can be helpful, energy healing, and one of my favorite phrases is the issue is in the tissue. And I think there's some energetic imprinting that can happen with trauma where and it's very woo-woo and my inner scientist is like I can't believe I'm saying this, but I feel like there's like the energy of trauma can get stuck in our tissue, and that can be such an important part of healing. So I look forward to hearing more about your journey. Kathleen, would you like to share with us your story?
Sure. I grew up in a fairly dysfunctional family, so there was some background trauma just from that. When I was 16, I was sexually assaulted by a stranger, and I didn't tell anybody. My idea was like, let's just forget about this as quickly as we can and move on. And of course, that wasn't possible, but I did the best I could. And but I turned to food and I began compulsively overeating. I quickly gained a lot of weight, as much as I think it was like 40 pounds in 1 month. Um, and people noticed, but this was the 70s. They weren't as aware about the emotional aspect of compulsive eating, and I certainly didn't want to talk about it. I still just kept it to myself. And that really established a whole decade or longer of disordered eating. And towards my late 20s, I added drinking and a little bit of drug use into the mix, which certainly didn't help. I was just numbing out and stumbling through life. And fortunately, I found my way into some 12-step programs, and that began the work of healing from the trauma. Although I didn't exactly recognize that's what I was doing, I thought, well, I'm addressing these addictive behaviors and use of addictive substances. And it was a long journey before I finally let go of those behaviors and substances. Oh, and around age 30, that's also when I developed chronic pain. It was called fibromyalgia, for lack of a better diagnosis. I know now I also had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And I feel like the healing really accelerated when I finally became free of all my addictive substances and behaviors many years later, about age 45. But then there was no buffer, no hiding anymore for the feelings, just clarity. And that was hard work, but that was wonderful because I learned to let go of that flight or fight constant state of high vigilance, high anxiety. And that certainly began some healing journey with a pain as well. And I've certainly seen the connection between the past trauma, and not only did it lead to compounding more traumas, but it certainly exacerbated the pain from holding all that tension inside. And also, I just did not take good care of myself when I was in that state. Even once I was solidly in recovery, you don't sleep as well if you're in constant anxiety, you don't eat as well or exercise regularly. So as I began to heal more along in the journey of sobriety, then the pain lessened, and I also developed ways of just not reacting so badly to the pain, because that's all one big mix, is the pain, but also the emotional reaction to the pain, which just compounds the problems. But it's a process, so I continue the journey.
It certainly is an ongoing process. I work in the field of addiction medicine now, and I will say that I don't think I've seen a single patient in the addiction setting that doesn't have a background of trauma. And I think that the wounding of trauma can really lead to self-destructive behaviors and addiction and depression and then I liked how you kind of phrased it as like compounding those traumas. So then it's a whole messy ball of wax to try to unwind. But first, if you have an active addiction, it's really hard to heal or even see or find the underlying trauma. So I think probably that would be a common experience that people would sort of start to heal, find ways to clear the waters so that they can see the underlying issues. Heather, would you like to share your story?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm Heather Grace. I'm a social worker working in the child welfare system. And my childhood was very difficult. Basically, every type of abuse I could have suffered, I did at the hands of my father. And my mother had a lot of complex feelings about the situation, so I wasn't necessarily close with her. It was very difficult as a result. And, I didn't really see the connection for a lot of years. All I knew was that at 19, I was in a terrible car accident, head on collision caused by a drunk driver. And that was compounded by years sitting at a computer working in IT. And things just were going worse and worse for me until I developed severe constant pain and lost everything, lost my career, lost my home, all of that. And the one bright side was that I was able to use the money from the sale of my home that I could not keep to put into my healthcare, and found the best doctor I could possibly find. And that started me on my journey. And I thought the whole time, something's not right here. Lots of people have car accidents. Lots of people, have work injuries. What is different here? And I never really accepted that it was just a couple of incidents in my life that led to me having this pain. And so I was always looking for answers. And eventually I stumbled onto some research that said that stress was a huge factor. And I thought, that makes sense. I've been through a lot in my life. And so I looked more into other ways to take care of myself, looking into meditation, yoga, exercise, any possible way I could to deal with things. But I think the biggest factor, the thing that helped me most, was ironically helping others. I don't want to see anyone else end up with severe nerve damage and all of the problems I had having Ehlers-Danlos and complex regional pain syndrome together. And I didn't want to see anyone go through my experiences. So I started doing a lot of advocacy work through the internet. I was blogging a lot and on social media, trying to help others as best I could. Because ultimately, for me, that drives me. Helping others improve their lives, avoid the type of things that happened to me, all of that made a huge difference. And I think that actually led to me becoming a social worker when my health finally improved, when all the work I was doing actually got me there. And I'm so happy. I feel so blessed to be able to help others and to not deal with severe constant pain anymore. I still have pain, but it's not the same. And I think dealing with the trauma that I went through was the factor in getting me better.
That's a beautiful, beautiful story. I'm so glad that you were able to find ways to give back and find meaning in helping others. And I think one aspect of post-traumatic growth, certainly in my life, as well as I think in all of our panelists here, is that sense of mission and wanting to help other people. It might look different for every person, but there's something healing in that, and there's something that soothes the wounds of the soul. If we can find a sense of mission or purpose in our trauma, not that we wanted that trauma, not that we are glad it happened, but that we can take that poison and turn it into medicine. And that's one of my favorite Buddhist sayings, is we take the poison and turn it into medicine. And so if we can find a way to find meaning in our experience, ultimately as humans, that's very healing. And unfortunately, trauma is a aspect of human life. I think there's very few humans who are not affected by trauma in some way, shape, or form. So post-traumatic growth or healing from trauma is also a very common human experience. It's just that when you're in the middle of it, when you're in the middle of the shattering, or when you're stumbling around, Kathleen, I think you said it, kind of stumbling, just trying to survive, it's so hard in that time to feel a sense of hope or that you will someday be able to help other people. And I'm hoping that anybody listening today that is sort of in that just post shatter experience will find some inspiration in folks that are a little farther down the line, and that there's hope in that. even when there's an active gaping wound. Maria, do you want to share with us kind of some of the things that worked for you as far as post-traumatic growth and maybe some things that didn't work for you?
Yeah, sure. I've done a lot of things, and it did start for me with the chronic pain because I didn't think anything was wrong with my life until the moment when I was 40 when I ruptured that disc. But so, like I said, I tried all the traditional medical things, and that wasn't working. The body work was the first thing that brought me to understand the connection of the mind, body, brain trauma connection. But so I once I remembered about the sexual abuse, I started doing psychotherapy, and that was, at the time I didn't feel like it wasn't helping as much as the body work, but I've done so many things now. But I started writing. That was a huge thing. Right after I remembered, it took about 3 months before. I mean, I wrote it a couple of words down that night. I remembered, but it was like I just said childhood, and then for 3 months I couldn't write anything. But then it all just started spilling out. I could not stop writing, and I have my memoir that I wrote. Took me 12 years, and I had to pare it down from the about 1,000 pages to the 277-page book that it is, because I was just spilling everything out. So writing was huge, taking care of myself, just allowing time and being kind to myself, allowing myself, making boundaries for myself, not pushing myself, trying, learning. I had to learn these things because this was not how I operated in my whole life. I was a scientist, an environmental scientist, doing consulting work and loving it, kids, whatever, did it all. But this forced me to stop and slow down. So what else? Gosh, there's so many things, but I've tried different therapies, EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, somatic experiencing. Those I felt were helpful. For me, acupuncture just spiked up my pain, didn't help me. I know a lot of people it works for. I'm afraid to try chiropractic care. I don't want anybody manipulating my spine. I can do it myself. I'll twist my and crack my back, but that I'm a little afraid of. Yeah, and I think a lot of it, like I said, the writing got a lot of it out. I speak now. Since I published my book, now I'll do podcasts and getting my voice out there. I've even just published my audiobook. So that was another process of getting it out of me. This whole process has been getting this trauma out of my body where it's been stuck and just trapped. So that's what's helped me, I think, the most. There's not one thing, there's not two things. It's that whole combination, and it's the process. Because first I learned to listen to my body. I had to listen to what the pain was saying. I finally realized it was a message, or I feel like it's a message. So once I could listen to that, then I could address the trauma. And then from there, I realized I can't listen too much to the pain, because I was then giving deference to it, and I was afraid to do anything all the time. And that panic of it's getting, I made it worse. I did something and I made it worse. Once I changed that narrative and realized that wasn't what the problem was, once I addressed the emotions and the trauma, and do not panic, and just know that I'm healing, know that it goes up and down. It's going to go backwards and forward, but slowly and slowly it's still moving forward. So just keeping that in mind was really important. Celebrating every little bit of success. Just knowing that you can heal, and being patient and accepting. Well, yeah, and let me just add too, I did start a nonprofit with 4 other women to advocate for
in your spare time.
Yeah, in my spare time. So that's been, since my book came out, that was the last thing I was able to speak of openly, because I could talk about the pain, but it took me even about a year after I published my book to even say my brother molested me out loud. So, and now I speak on that, and I advocate for people with that issue. So.
Thank you for doing that. And it sounds like sharing your story, getting your story out of you, as you said, like the release of writing and the release of kind of sharing, as opposed to holding it in and keeping that secret. I think it sounds like that was a really powerful part of your healing, along with body work. And certainly I imagine that might be something we hear in other panelists' journeys as well, because sharing our story and changing the narrative that we're telling ourselves seems to be so key. For me, what really happened with my early abandonment trauma is that I somehow absorbed from that the belief that I was bad, that I was unlovable. And it was not on a conscious level, and it was not conscious. I wasn't conscious of it until several years ago. in my healing process through EMDR. But I know that that feeling affected how I interacted with other people, affected my relationships, affected my mood. I think it was a huge part of my depression. And so the narrative that we tell ourselves, even like on a not a conscious level so much, but more like on a belief level, our subconscious beliefs about ourselves, that can be so important to find and shift as part of post-traumatic growth. Heather, would you like to share what worked for you in your journey and if there's things you've tried that didn't work?
Yeah, well, I think for me, this journey started a long time ago. The abuse I suffered as a child, it was really hard. So I was journaling from the time I was very young, and that was a coping mechanism I used because I couldn't tell anybody what was happening in my home. It was just not allowed. It would never have been okay. And then as I got older, even though I was in the middle of college getting a journalism degree, I realized that psychology was really kind of calling me. So I added a second major in my junior year and ended up graduating with a degree in psychology as well. And that really helped me to understand my family better and understand how common it is to have the problems that I experienced, to have a very abusive, substance abusing parent who took out all of their trauma on me, and my brother and my mom, and made things extremely difficult. And I think that was where it started. Of course, I went into therapy myself later and did a lot of work there. But I think a lot of this really has been about accepting the situation I was in, accepting that this happened, and not feeling sorry for myself, but just knowing I'm one of so many who've been through a really rough life. I had a very hard childhood, and then I had pain for, over a decade that was so debilitating I couldn't do much of anything. And just realizing that, but also, you can't probably see it, but there's a ring with a silver one on the top that says hope on it. And I just always have worn this because it's important to me that I know no matter how bad it gets, I'm not ever without hope. And maybe it's just symbolic, but it's important to me. And everything I did after that, all the ways I improved my health, just kind of on a mission to get better, exercise, and taking good care of myself, dealing with the days that are difficult by meditation or watching a silly movie, like whatever it takes. Laughter therapy is wonderful, and all of those things have helped me on this journey. And I think ultimately it's about finding those things for yourself, finding the things that make a difference in your life. And they're different for everybody. Just because somebody says you must do this, this is the way. I don't believe that. I believe you find your way. And all of us heal in time if we're able to find the right tools and resources to get there, the ones that speak to us, the ones that really give us that benefit.
Your hope ring makes me want to cry. That's so wonderful that you've had that reminder in front of you all these years, because that is so fundamental. I think hope, and it can be really hard to feel hope, I think, in the aftermath of trauma, along with self-care, finding ways to take care of ourselves better. It sounds like that was key for you. And laughter and finding joy. It can seem like, at least with chronic pain, my experience and many of my patients, they say that like joy has been sucked out of life because every day becomes a battle, just this battle against pain, this battle for survival, and trying to find some small ways to enjoy our our life and accept where we are, but still have hope for the future. And the other day, Kathleen, when we were speaking, you had mentioned some beautiful ways that you try to appreciate your environment and where you are. So I'd love to hear your story of what's worked for you and what hasn't, and how you've attained the growth post trauma that you have.
Sure. Well, as I said, a lot of it just happened naturally through facing the addiction issues, and when I stopped numbing all my feelings, I had to deal with what was underneath but I'll say for some reason therapy didn't work for me. It just never quite clicked, or maybe I didn't find the right therapist. But when I did start participating in the recovery community, 12-step communities, I started talking about things that I'd never talked about before, about the psychological and sometimes physical abuse that took place in my family, and about what happened to me when I was 16. I talked about that with some trusted women. And hearing other people's stories was so powerful because, as Heather was saying, you just realize you're not the only one who's been through this, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's not something you talk about with everyone, but it's unfortunately a part of many of our experience. And just feeling like you're part of you're not different. You're not like the only one this has happened to. You're not alone in your suffering, and there is a way out. That was very powerful. And for me too, having this be my first sexual encounter, this abuse, caused me to direct a lot of hatred against myself, internalized misogyny, body dysmorphia, and so I did a lot of work with that. I was just coming to accept my body and appreciate it. And yoga helped a lot with that, although for a while I got a little sidetracked into a sort of competitive athletic yoga, which is actually very bad for anyone with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So that did not help. It might have even set off my chronic pain, and it was not helping at all. But I did learn to do a very gentle type of yoga with more emphasis on relaxation than on doing things like headstands or challenging physical things. And that helped me get in touch with my body and appreciate it. And I would say also what I would call my spiritual journey is a sense of being connected with something greater than myself. That gave me a sense of expansion and appreciation for community, for the world. When I was in pain, both physically and from my trauma, my world was very contracted and very self-centered. And that was a scary place to be. And then as I relax and, as I healed from the trauma, I'm more available to others. I participated in life more. I let myself just expand. And that's been very healing. And it also gives me a sense of course, if you've been a victim of trauma, as we all were, you're left with, I mean, we all hear about the flight or fight impulse or, tendency, but, the tension that goes along with that. But it comes down to feeling very vulnerable, and it's hard to relax if you feel vulnerable and unsafe. So I think connecting with something greater than myself helps me to feel safe no matter what. I mean, we're all vulnerable as mortal human beings, but I have a core sense of safety and of love. I feel like we're all loved. And then I think forgiveness is important too. That's really helped me heal. And that concept and term, we need to be careful of it. It can be misused. It doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, but I just started to see that those who've wronged me or my family, the troubles that they had, my parents had, everyone's on their path, and to try and be as understanding and as loving towards them as you can, which again, that doesn't mean you don't have boundaries and you're not going to hang out with people that don't make you feel secure or safe. But forgiveness has been very helpful in the sense of just letting go of a sense of anger and resentment.
That's beautiful. Easier said than done, I will say. Sometimes can be challenging. I think I wanted to speak a little bit. Something that you said really resonated with me, and that you didn't find talk therapy particularly helpful. And I will say, of my journey of trying to heal, particularly, with depression, the first thing you do really is go see it. Everybody says go see a therapist. So I seriously probably spent $10,000 in 10 years in talk therapy from, my mid 20s to my mid 30s. And I really didn't see much change in my experience of life. And I think I think part of it is because, and this is not to say that therapy can't be helpful. It has been helpful in other ways for me, but not in kind of the healing of the post-traumatic wound, I would say. And I think it's because our cognitive brain is not what is really impacted so much by a trauma. A trauma really affects our core sense of self, our animal brain, our sense of survival. And that part of our brain doesn't really listen to the cognitive part. Like if you right now think with your cognitive brain, okay, stomach, I want you to digest more. Like you can't, there's no, right? Like, okay, heart, I want you to go faster and then skip a beat. Like we can't control. There's part of our brain that is outside of our conscious control and and part of our body that we cannot control things with our thinking brain. And for me, that realization was so helpful because I felt like I was just sort of banging my head against the wall with talk therapy. But then when I found things like EMDR, which are really more trying to look at like what is your subconscious brain doing, and the somatic work and the body work and the energy healing that I did, and even like working with shamanic healers, and anything that is sort of more addressing the heart and soul rather than the brain. And I feel like cognitive therapy can get very stuck in the brain. So that was kind of my experience. But this is not to dissuade people from doing talk therapy. It can be very helpful, but to not forget the huge emotional aspect of trauma. And if we don't address that, I think we can get stuck in kind of a loop. One other thing I wanted to just say, I think we've all kind of described sexual trauma as part of our wounding. And I think with that, we can sometimes lose our sense of sexuality, our sense of safety, our sense of pleasure, our sense of acceptance of our body. And that's something I'm still working on healing. That is an ongoing process. But I think recognizing that that is sort of one of the shards that can happen. Like I think about like a ceramic vase or something that when the trauma occurred, it was like, and if that vase is my soul, it got thrown against a wall and shattered. And all these little pieces went in all these different ways. And so part of healing has been finding all those pieces, finding different parts of myself, reintegrating, accepting the broken parts, and then trying to seal them back up into a shape that's going to be not the same as what I was before, different. And my favorite visual for this, and what I just love it, is the Japanese art of kintsugi, which is where they take broken ceramics and use gold to seal it up. And that gold sealed up vase is actually thought to be more valuable than the first vase. The precious scars is what I would say. One question I would ask the panel is if you could go back in time to any younger self, maybe something yourself a week ago, 10 years ago, at 3 years, the younger self that is struggling with some aspect of trauma and is in the dark days of it, not in the days where you feel like there's any healing or you feel like there's no hope. Is there something that you would say to that younger self, or a message that you would want to sort of maybe share with someone else who's in that same kind of the active part, like the just having been traumatized part of self? And whoever wants to jump in, I'm not going to call on you anymore.
Yeah, as far as the younger self, I do have lots of younger selves that I would like to talk to. But, I think most of what I said already is my 40-ish year old self when the pain started and all the different things I could have done. One was just, I said this earlier, but listen to my body. If I had listened to my body, it was telling me, in retrospect, I looked back and saw things that, a little bit of pain here and there. I just ignored it and ignored it and ignored it until it stopped me in my tracks, and I was debilitated. If I had listened more carefully before and slowed down, maybe it wouldn't have gotten to that point of completely falling off the cliff. That's one thing. But I do want to go back to my traumatized 10-year-old because I really feel like this is so core. And I think, like Ginevra, you were just saying, that sexual abuse is as a child with by a family member for me was just so traumatic, enough that my brain put it out of my head for 32 years. But I would just say you're safe. It's not your fault. And I didn't tell anybody, well, because I didn't remember, but there's just some evidence from a letter that we found in the attic of my parents' house that indicated that I might have asked my mother if she would sleep with me that night. And for me, it was just a one-time incident, but enough to deeply traumatize me. And I think I felt my mother's rejection. And that, just from research I've done too, is almost as devastating as sometimes the abuse itself. So that is, just try to tell somebody and don't hold it in. I didn't know I was at the time, but maybe at 10, if I had known that it was okay to keep trying to tell somebody, maybe that would have made a difference, instead of festering for 32 years and plus. So,
Yeah. So talk about it into your body. It sounds like would be the messages that listeners of this panel might glean as far as tips for post-traumatic growth. Heather, were you gonna add something?
Yeah, I think a lot of what she was saying is so true, is so important. I think when you're young and you don't understand what's happening or why, it can be really traumatic in and of itself, just not knowing why your life is the way it is, but your best friend who lives across the street has this great family, and so I think we have a tendency to try to figure out a way to fix it. And for me, it was like, I have to make everything right in this house. I took it on myself. I wanted to save my brother. I wanted to save my mom. I wanted to do whatever I could to make the impossible happen and make it feel safe and happy. And that wasn't possible. It just wasn't. And so I think it's important to know your limits and to realize that things that happen in your childhood can propel you into this life where you feel like you have to be perfect all the time. And that affected me for so many years. I think it's probably why my job took such a toll on my body too, because I didn't say no. I really didn't. If they had higher expectations, if I lost a staff member and they said we couldn't afford to replace them, I was just, okay, then I have to take this on now. Oh, I have to work on New Year's Eve to get these things done before January 1 rolls around, because otherwise the website won't work the way I want it to. And just working and working and working and hurting myself and realizing that had roots in my childhood, of trying to make things perfect when nobody's perfect. It's not possible. I think it's really important to just be gentle with yourself and to realize that you're okay exactly as you are. You don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to continually try to make other people like you, to do the best job possible at your role, because none of us is perfect and none of us should take on that kind of a burden.
I heartily agree. I it breaks my heart though to think about young Heather trying to fix, at 6 years old or 8 years old, trying to fix your family and taking on that responsibility, and in a way sort of taking on the responsibility for the world. It's like the weight that you put on your young shoulders was enough to break anyone. So you are very strong. All of you are very strong. And
well, and some of us do it subconsciously. Most of us probably
right,
do it
right.
subconsciously as well.
Yeah.
I didn't think I was doing that. I didn't think, oh, I
The
have to
fixing, you mean?
save the
Yeah.
family. But
Yeah.
I've learned through therapy that that's what I was doing. I had to keep the family together. My survival
Right.
depended on it in my mind. So,
Right. Right.
sorry to
Because that's
interrupt.
what is going to make you feel safe, right? Is that things are okay. I have to make everything okay because things definitely don't feel okay inside, is sort of one way to think about it. Kathleen, what would you say to any version of your younger self? It's like the Matryoshka dolls, like little inside, so whichever one of your
Right.
younger selves.
Yeah, I would say that it's not your responsibility to hide this, to protect the family. It's not my shame, and that the things that happened to me within the family and then with the assault, I would say that or for anyone, who's experienced that, that does not define who you are. And it seems like it should go without saying that that doesn't make me less worthy as a human being, but I really did feel that. I might not have stated it that way, but I really did feel like I was so much less than anyone else, really. Just incredibly low self-esteem. And if I could go back and just say, you're as precious and beautiful as anybody, I think that would have given me a lot of strength and could have changed the trajectory of my life in a lot of ways. So I would hope, yeah, anyone younger going through that could see that they're as worthy as anyone else. I think it took me a long time to get help too, because I didn't feel like I deserved help or that I shouldn't need help. I should be able to figure this out on my own, and it's really not that big a deal. And oh, and the minimization of the past. It's like, okay, there are plenty of families that were worse than mine. There are plenty of traumatic events that were worse than mine. I should be stronger and just not make such a big deal out of this. So, you know, anybody, if it affects you, it affects you. And we need to honor that. So I would have loved, well, I can say that to my younger self. I would have loved to have understood that then. And I hope anyone going through that or recently going through that can understand that.
I think that is a beautiful sentiment to take away. I think one of the wisest therapists I ever worked with told me it's not only the trauma, but it's the negative belief about yourself that you internalize that can cause so much of the downstream damage. And that sounds kind of obvious, right? Like it's like, oh, that makes, but I literally had never thought about that before. Oh, when my mom rejected me when I was 3 or 4, I internalized I am not worthy, I am not lovable, I am not, and to have that inside me, and and it's not like a thought, it's like a belief. I think that's the piece that's so, it's so insidious and so intense, and we, it might be totally below our conscious, these beliefs might be totally below our conscious level, but I keep bringing that up because it was such a like eye-opening experience for me. Um, and so if I were to answer that question that I posed, I would definitely say that to my younger self, that you are lovable and you are good, and this is not your fault. And it always makes me tear up, even just sort of like saying that. And that's how I know that's how I know it's hitting my, you know, my heart and soul. And I wanted to just speak to those that might be experiencing a fresh trauma, because I have been experiencing a bit of a fresh trauma. So my marriage exploded a little over a year ago, and I didn't want it to end. And my husband basically left me, and I was shattered. I still am. And what has helped me to be fiercer and stronger in this post-traumatic growth experience is knowing that I did it before. And when I hear other people's stories and see other people that are survivors, and not just survivors, but conquerors, and with such ferocity have transformed their lives and transformed and grown from that trauma. Even in my darkest times, I never gave up hope. And I think maybe I need a hope. I had a virtual hope ring, I think. And that has made this, I'm not going to say it hasn't been terrible and hellish, because it has, but that has been the one like slight difference. So somehow, if anybody's watching this, if they can hold on and glean that message of hope, that healing and feeling better is definitely possible. And not only possible, you can do it. With that, would each of you like to say just like 1 or 2 sentences to sort of finish this up about, you know, what, if you were sitting in front of somebody right now and like you wanted to give them a little encouragement as they go on their journey, what would you like to share?
I think it's important that people know it's never too late to work on themselves, to get through whatever it is they've experienced, no matter how many years ago it was. I think we all have a lot of trauma, and I think we all come to accept that at our own pace. So, you know, I think it's really important to acknowledge that too. it's tough. It's tough to face up to things that hurt us, that damage our health mentally and physically. But, we'll all get there if we are able to put in the work in our own time. And
And in our
nobody
own
can tell
way.
you how. Yeah, nobody can tell you
Yeah,
how.
I totally agree. And everybody's journey is different. What works for somebody is not going to be the same. So experimentation is so important. Kathleen or Maria, any last thoughts?
Well, I would say don't be afraid of the feelings. I was for so many years, and when I stopped and actually faced them, they were intense, but they didn't last, and they would come and go, but they didn't hurt me. And you will come out the other side, and it is so beautiful to be on the other side because then you don't feel like you're constantly under barrage and you're constantly needing to run from something and to escape something. And, there is support. Get the support that you need, in line with what I would say to my younger self. It's like, you're worth it. Your mental and physical health is worth the time and resources that you put into it. And it doesn't have to be a huge undertaking. You don't need to undergo intensive work or therapy. It can be integrated into your life and you work at your own pace. But there really is a bright light on the other side where you can be comfortable in your own skin, comfortable with your community, and just with living your life. So I would say it's well worth the difficulty of going through the process of facing the past trauma and everything else. As I think that's a good point, Ginevra. You point out that trauma can always come up, and if we haven't dealt with past trauma too, like I found I reacted so badly to everything that came up, and new traumas, it's just life. It comes up, and if you haven't resolved the old stuff, then you don't really have the good coping skills or a stable state from which to deal with it. It just makes it that much harder. No, I was just going to say, to sum up, face it and walk through it at your own pace.
Beautiful. Seriously, so much of my early abandonment trauma, like the soul wounds that I've been working on, have been after the implosion of my life with the divorce. Like that's when all this stuff came up, and it was almost like the vase that I had sort of glued together was like, oh no, actually that glue was not, no. Like now we need to really break it. But it was only with that really I was able to get the down into the deeper parts. And honestly, part of my abandonment wounding is probably why my marriage ended, because there was some, unhealthy codependent behavior that I was exhibiting. But I digress. That's a story for another day. Maria, do you have any last words for
Yeah.
our listeners?
Yeah, I guess perseverance is just what keeps jumping in my head. Persevere, never give up, but be easy on yourself. Take your time. And yeah, I think it's just so important not to push yourself and feel like I have to persevere in the way that I'm not going to stop. I'm going to push myself too hard. That's not helpful. It's taking the time to rest when you need to stop and not do anything for a while and let the body process things. And then when it's ready again, start another step. So it's steps and stages. It has been for me. There has been some very intense work that I've done, and I feel like that was very important and still is. I'm back in therapy now and doing some of this parts work, and it's sort of it's the first time I've felt it's more of a talk therapy scenario that is working better. I think because I've done all the somatic and body work, maybe because all the work I've done, I'm able to kind of bypass my cognitive brain almost, and I feel like I'm a 10-year-old speaking sometimes, and things just come out of my mouth. So just try different things. When something doesn't work, stop, take a break, try something else, but keep going and never give up, because there is hope and it gets so much better.
Well, Heather, Maria, and Kathleen, it's been wonderful getting to know you, and I'm honored that you took the time to share your stories with us. And you're all inspirational. And I use this term. We used to use the term fibro warrior, for dealing with somebody who's fighting chronic pain. But I've decided I don't like the warrior term. I like fierce. I think we have enough war in our world, but I want everybody to feel fierce. And I think you all three women are wonderful examples of fabulous fierce women. So thank you so much. And I just wanted to end with a quote of one of my favorite authors, Jennifer Storm. Neither your pain nor your offender gets to finish your story. You have the power to write your own ending. And with that, we shall end. Thank you all.